It was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. All across the Western Front, from the fields of France to the forests of Belgium, 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed came to a sudden, almost eerie stop. Men who had spent years trying to kill each other stood in silence. Some wept, others stared blankly, unsure what peace even meant anymore. The Great War, the war to end all wars, was finally over. But how did the world get to this moment? And what did it really mean when the guns fell silent? Welcome to Earth Sights on This Day series, and today we are focusing on the history of the First World War. By 1918, the First World War had been raging for more than 4 years. What began as a short, sharp conflict in the summer of 1914 had devolved into a grinding nightmare of trenches, barbed wire, and artillery fire. On the Western Front, from the North Sea to the Swiss border, millions of men were dug in, barely moving, barely surviving. Entire landscapes had been turned into wastelands. Towns vanished under shell fire. Rivers ran red with mud and blood. Every country involved had reached a breaking point. Britain faced food shortages and crippling losses. France had been fighting on its own soil since the beginning. Russia had already collapsed into revolution and civil war. And Germany, despite its early victories, was running out of time, food, and faith. It was a total war. Every farm, factory, and family was part of it. Civilians starved while soldiers froze in trenches. And as 1918 began, both sides were desperate to end it, but neither could afford to lose. In March 1918, Germany made one last, massive gamble. With Russia out of the war after the Bolshevik Revolution, Germany shifted hundreds of thousands of troops from the Eastern Front to the West. The goal was to deliver a knockout blow before the Americans, who had entered the war in 1917, could fully arrive. This became known as the Spring Offensive, or Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's Battle. At first, it worked. German troops broke through British lines and advanced farther in weeks than they had in years. Paris was once again in range of German artillery, but the success came at a devastating cost. Germany had no reserves left, and its supply lines were stretched to breaking point. The Allies, meanwhile, regrouped under a unified command led by French General Ferdinand Foch, and they began to push back. By the summer of 1918, the tide had turned for good. From August to November 1918, the Allies launched a relentless counterattack, known as the 100 Days Offensive. It wasn't a single battle, but a rolling wave of offensives from Amiens to the Meuse-Argonne. Tanks, aircraft, and fresh American troops helped to break through the stalemate that had defined the war for years. German forces were pushed back across occupied France, retreating toward their own borders. Morale collapsed. Soldiers surrendered in droves. Desertion became rampant. For the first time, even German generals admitted the war was lost. Meanwhile, on the home front, Germany was imploding. Food shortages had turned cities into powder kegs of unrest. Workers went on strike. Sailors mutinied. The empire itself began to crumble. In early November 1918, revolution swept through Germany. Sailors at the port of Kiel refused orders to sail on what they knew would be a suicidal final mission. Their rebellion spread to soldiers and workers across the country. Red flags were raised, councils were formed, and the old order disintegrated almost overnight. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II, the man who had led Germany into war, fled into exile in the Netherlands. The German Empire was no more. A new government, led by moderate Social Democrats, scrambled to restore order. But with Allied troops advancing and the German army on the verge of collapse, their first act was clear. They had to end the war. The morning of November 11th was unlike any other. In the early hours, messages flashed across telegraph lines. Ceasefire at 11 a.m. Yet, until the very last moment, fighting continued. Shells still fell, and soldiers still died, some within minutes of peace. Private George Lawrence Price, a Canadian, was killed just 2 minutes before the ceasefire began, believed to be the last Commonwealth soldier to die in the war. Then, at 11 o'clock, the guns fell silent. From Belgium to the Balkans, from the Alps to the English Channel, 4 years of thunder faded into stillness. Soldiers stepped out of their trenches dazed. Some cheered, others prayed. Many simply stood and listened to silence. Across Europe, church bells rang for the first time in years. People poured into the streets, waving flags, hugging strangers, and weeping for joy, and for those who would never come home. The Great War was over. If you want to explore more stories from history that shaped our world, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you for watching.